The evening of the bake sale started like any other mundane school event. I stood behind a plastic folding table in the gymnasium arranging cellophane-wrapped brownies. My 8-year-old son, Leo, sat on the bleachers nearby, trading superhero cards with his classmates. The room was loud, echoing with the squeak of rubber soles on hardwood and the chatter of tired parents. I wiped powdered sugar off my hands when the man in the windbreaker approached. He didn't look like a parent. He held a clipboard tight against his chest. "Avery Alexander," he said, a statement, not a question. I nodded, reaching for a brownie. "Can I help you?" He dropped a thick manila envelope onto the table. Right on top of the baked goods, "You have been served." He turned and walked back out the double doors before I could process the words. The noise in the gymnasium faded into a dull static. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, the kind law firms used to make threats feel tangible. I broke the seal and pulled out the legal filing. The bold black ink at the top read, District Court of Douglas County. Then the names, Richard and Susan Alexander versus Avery Alexander. My chest tightened, restricting my breath to shallow bursts. I scanned the first page. Breach of contract, fraudulent concealment, a demand for an immediate asset freeze, and 80% of the Alexander Horizon Trust. They knew the name of the trust I had spent 3 weeks building in secret. I did not cry. My hands gripped the edge of the plastic table until my knuckles turned white. As a compliance officer, panic is a luxury I cannot afford. Instead, my brain compartmentalized the betrayal and started categorizing the risk. My parents had not just thrown a tantrum over my hidden wealth. They had retained an aggressive litigator, drafted a formal complaint, and paid a process server to humiliate me in public mere feet from where my son was playing. I looked over at Leo. He was laughing, unaware that his grandparents were currently trying to gut the foundation of his future. They wanted my money not because they needed it to survive, but because they felt an intrinsic, terrifying entitlement to everything I produced. I slid the lawsuit back into the envelope and locked my jaw. The people who raised me just declared war, assuming I was still the quiet, obedient daughter who would beg for peace. They were about to meet the auditor. The drive home from the school gymnasium felt like navigating through thick water. I kept my hands gripped at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my knuckles aching from the tension. In the rearview mirror, Leo was humming a cartoon theme song, kicking his light-up sneakers against the back of the passenger seat. He was blissfully ignorant of the legal bomb sitting just inches away from him. The manila envelope rested on the upholstery, heavy and toxic, a physical manifestation of my family's greed. When we finally reached our driveway, I went through the evening motions with mechanical precision. I cooked macaroni and cheese. I checked math homework. I read a bedtime story about dragons and tucked the blankets under Leo's chin. Only when his bedroom door clicked shut did I allow myself to drop the facade. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the pendant lights, and slid the lawsuit out of the envelope. The pages fanned across the cold granite island. I traced the paragraphs with my index finger, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. Attorney Vance had drafted a narrative claiming the Mega Millions ticket was purchased under an oral agreement, a shared family venture. They were demanding 80% of the Alexander Horizon Trust. To understand the sheer audacity of that demand, you must understand the grim arithmetic of my family. I view human relationships through the lens of compliance and ledgers. Because growing up in our Nebraska home, affection was strictly a transactional currency. In my parents' eyes, there were 2 distinct categories of offspring. My older brother Chase was the golden investment. I was the overhead, in business. You pour capital into your investments hoping for a return. You minimize, ignore, and resent your overhead. Chase was a charismatic serial entrepreneur. He possessed a bright, blinding smile and a hollow core. His business ventures consistently imploded, leaving craters of debt that my parents happily filled by remortgaging their house or draining their savings. There was the app development company that never produced a line of code, the boutique fitness gym that shuttered in 4 months, and most notably, the premium dropshipping enterprise 2 years ago. When Chase announced his dropshipping company, my parents treated it like a coronation. They threw a catered launch party in their backyard. I remember standing near the edge of the patio, holding a plastic cup of sparkling water. The lawn was decorated with rented white tents and high-top tables draped in heavy linen. Waiters carried silver trays of shrimp skewers and bruschetta. Chase stood at the center of the crowd wearing a tailored navy suit purchased with our parents' home equity, clinking a champagne flute and talking about his visionary market disruption. That same week, I had earned my promotion to Senior Financial Compliance Director. I had worked 70-hour weeks auditing relentless corporate accounts to secure that title. I quietly mentioned the promotion to my father near the buffet table. Richard barely looked away from his golden son. He gave a dismissive grunt, scooped a meatball onto his plate, and suggested I use my new position to review Chase's tax filings for free. My achievement was invisible unless it could be leveraged to serve the investment. I survived this environment by adopting a policy of silent endurance. I took out federal student loans to pay for state college. I worked night shifts at a logistics call center to cover my rent. I expected nothing from them, and they delivered exactly that. But the silence did not protect me from their scorn. My mother, Susan, harbored a specific sharp disdain for my methods of survival. She viewed my steady, predictable life as a symptom of my lack of ambition. "Why don't you take some risks, Avery?" she would ask, her voice laced with disappointment. "Look at Chase. He's always innovating." She saw my fiscal prudence as a personal affront, a quiet rebuke of their own chaotic financial decisions. The lottery ticket had been a small act of rebellion. A $10 scratch-off I bought on a whim after a particularly grueling week of auditing. I never expected to win. When the numbers aligned, revealing a $22 million jackpot, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. I knew, with absolute certainty, that if my parents found out, they would claim it as their own. So, I kept it secret. I consulted with a trusted financial advisor and spent months meticulously structuring the Alexander Horizon Trust, a legal fortress designed to protect the money for Leo's future. I made an anonymous donation to a local children's hospital, a small act of philanthropy that brought me more joy than the money itself. It was that donation, coupled with a local news anchor's reporting error that linked the anonymous donor to my family name, that ultimately exposed my secret. Now, sitting in my kitchen, staring at the lawsuit, I understood their strategy. They were leveraging my family's history of transactional affection, twisting it into a legal claim. The oral agreement they cited was a fabrication, a desperate attempt to retroactively insert themselves into my good fortune. But their greed had blinded them to a critical detail. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter. I was a senior financial compliance director. I spent my life auditing corporate paper trails and finding the exact moment people decide to cross a legal line. And my parents had just crossed a very big one. My first step was to analyze the funding source for their attorney, Vance. Law firms of that tier require verified wire transfers before they draft a single paragraph. If my parents did not have the cash and Chase was bankrupt, they must have found an alternative funding source. There were two possibilities. Either they had secured a high-risk, unsecured commercial loan from a secondary institution, or they had an inside advantage at the law firm itself. A backdoor channel subsidizing the exorbitant legal fees. I needed to audit my enemy. I needed to map the financial plumbing of Vance's operation to understand how a broke family was funding a premium war. If they were hiding a toxic funding source or exploiting an ethical vulnerability within the firm. I could use it to detonate their legal standing before we even discussed the forged Thanksgiving contract. I closed the browser tab containing Vance's biography and opened my encrypted communication portal. I needed a different kind of expertise. I needed someone who understood the digital architecture of law firms. Someone who could track internal billing codes and network access logs without leaving a footprint. I typed a quick message to a cybersecurity contractor I frequently utilized for corporate compliance audits, asking for a discreet favor. My parents thought the battlefield was confined to the forged piece of parchment. They had no idea I was about to dissect the entire foundation of their legal representation. The request to my cybersecurity contact was simple, professional, and discreet. Marcus was a former federal network analyst who transitioned to the private sector, specializing in identifying data leaks for corporate compliance firms. I frequently utilized his expertise when tracking untethered assets. I sent him a secure encrypted message detailing the name of Attorney Vance's law firm and a list of specific queries regarding their internal billing structure and document management access logs. I did not ask him to hack their secure servers or extract confidential client files. I asked him to run a passive open-source intelligence sweep. I wanted to know if the firm utilized a specific digital portal for client management and if there were any unusual routing patterns associated with the case file bearing my name. 2 days later, Marcus sent a reply. It contained a compressed data file and a brief cryptic note. Check the physical access logs matched against the VPN gateways. Your brother is not just a client. I downloaded the file, decrypted it using my private key, and opened the spreadsheet. Marcus had acquired the metadata for the electronic keycard access to the law firm's downtown Omaha building, cross-referenced with the virtual private network logins used by the firm's staff for remote work. I scrolled through the rows of data, my eyes tracking the timestamps. Attorney Vance operated on a standard executive schedule, accessing the network between 8:00 in the morning and 6:00 in the evening. The associated attorneys logged longer hours, occasionally accessing the system late into the night. But there was one anomaly, a specific employee identification number that displayed highly erratic, unauthorized behavior. I traced the ID number back to its assigned user. It belonged to a junior paralegal named Jessica. According to the logs, Jessica was routinely accessing my specific case file, the Alexander Horizon Trust litigation, outside of normal business hours. She was logging into the secure VPN from external IP addresses at 2:00, 3:00, and 4:00 in the morning. Furthermore, her electronic keycard registered multiple late-night entries into the physical law office on weekends, times when the building was supposed to be empty. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a picture of staggering ethical sleaze. My parents were entirely broke. They could never afford Vance's premium, hourly rate for the sheer volume of paperwork required to execute asset freezes and draft discovery packets. Vance likely demanded a flat retainer to initiate the case, but the ongoing granular legal work, the hundreds of billable hours required to form out the filings and submit the motions, had to be subsidized. Chase had found the subsidy, my golden brother. The charismatic serial entrepreneur who built a career out of exploiting the people around him had targeted a vulnerability within the firm itself. He was secretly sleeping with the junior paralegal. He was using Jessica to gain backdoor access to my legal filings. She was drafting their paperwork, fast-tracking their motions, and logging the hours off the firm's main ledger, effectively providing my parents with premium pro bono legal muscle. The sheer audacity of the manipulation was breathtaking, but it was perfectly consistent with Chase's psychology. He viewed everyone as a resource. He saw a junior staff member at a prestigious firm and realized he could leverage a romantic entanglement to bankrupt his own sister. He thought he was a strategic genius, outsmarting the system by planting a mole inside my enemy's camp. He thought the late-night building access and the unauthorized VPN logins were invisible. He did not realize he was leaving a blazing digital footprint of gross ethical violations across Vance's entire operation. I leaned back in my chair staring at the spreadsheet. This was the midpoint, the fulcrum upon which the entire legal battle balanced. Attorney Vance was an apex predator in the Omaha legal circuit. He was ruthless, but he was also a senior partner. He had built his reputation on strict procedural adherence and aggressive courtroom tactics. He would never, under any circumstances, tolerate a junior paralegal sleeping with a plaintiff and illegally altering billing records to provide free legal services. This was not just a breach of ethics, it was a professional death sentence for him if it came to light. I had found my leverage. The next day, I called Vance's office and requested an immediate settlement conference. His assistant, a stern woman with a voice like sandpaper, informed me that Mr. Vance was too busy with pressing litigation. I calmly explained that I had uncovered irregularities in his firm's internal billing and access logs pertaining to my case, and that I would be filing a formal complaint with the State Bar Association by end of day if a meeting wasn't scheduled. The phone line went silent for a moment, then she said, "Mr. Vance will see you this afternoon." I arrived at Vance's opulent office building, a glass and steel monolith in downtown Omaha. The waiting room was hushed, adorned with original art and dark wood. Vance himself was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed. With sharp eyes that missed nothing, he gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. "Ms. Alexander," he began, his voice smooth and controlled, "I understand you have some concerns." I placed a neatly organized folder on his desk. Inside were printouts of the spreadsheet Marcus had provided, highlighted sections detailing Jessica's late-night logins and key card entries, cross-referenced with my case file. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady, "I believe there's been a significant ethical breach within your firm regarding my parents' lawsuit. Specifically, a junior paralegal named Jessica has been providing unauthorized, unbilled services to the plaintiffs, my parents, Richard and Susan Alexander, and my brother, Chase Alexander. She's been accessing my confidential case files outside of business hours and using firm resources for personal gain, all while engaged in a romantic relationship with one of the plaintiff's family members." Vance's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or fear, crossed his eyes. He picked up the folder and flipped through the pages. The silence in the room stretched, heavy with unspoken implications. "This is a serious accusation, Ms. Alexander," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "It's not an accusation, Mr. Vance," I corrected him. "It's a forensic audit. The data is irrefutable, and I assure you, I have copies securely stored off-site. If this information were to reach the State Bar Association, or worse, the local news, it would be devastating for your firm's reputation. Not to mention your partnership." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on me. "What do you want, Ms. Alexander?" "I want the lawsuit dropped immediately," I stated, my voice unwavering. "I want a public apology from my parents, acknowledging their false claims, and I want a signed agreement that they will never attempt to contact me or my son again, nor will they ever make any claim to my assets. Furthermore, I want a full accounting of all funds they've spent on this frivolous lawsuit, which I will then use to file a countersuit for malicious prosecution and emotional distress." Vance closed the folder. He looked at me for a long moment. Then a thin smile touched his lips. "You're a formidable opponent, Ms. Alexander. Much like your father claimed you were a financial failure, I believe he underestimated you." He picked up his phone and made a series of terse calls, his voice low and urgent. Within an hour, I had a signed agreement in my hand, stipulating everything I had demanded. The lawsuit was dropped. My parents were to issue a public apology, and a restraining order was put in place to protect me and Leo from any further contact or claims. Walking out of Vance's office, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of their entitlement, their constant judgment, and their recent betrayal had finally been lifted. I had not just won a legal battle, I had reclaimed my peace. My parents, in their desperate attempt to seize what they believed was theirs, had exposed their own crimes and severed the last fragile threads of our relationship. Chase, the golden son, was left with a ruined reputation and a broken relationship, a consequence of his own manipulative actions. In their home, Chase was the investment and I was the overhead. This caste system is a dark, unspoken reality in many households. When parents designate a golden child, they do not merely neglect their other offspring. They actively handicap the favored child. By constantly shielding Chase from the natural consequences of his actions, by remortgaging their home, and ultimately committing federal fraud to bail him out, Richard and Susan did not teach him how to succeed. They taught him that he was immune to reality. They cultivated a breathtaking entitlement raising a man incapable of accountability, empathy, or genuine hard work. In their desperate attempt to manufacture his success, they engineered his total ruin. Conversely, their treatment of me highlights the devastating impact of conditional love. True parenting requires emotional awareness, the ability to see a child for who they are, to validate their struggles, and to celebrate their quiet victories. When Susan mocked my budget and dismissed my corporate promotions, she was teaching her daughter that competence and independence were not virtues, but rather threats to the family dynamic. I was forced to learn resilience, not through guidance, but through abandonment. I became a brilliant, hypervigilant professional because my parents afforded me absolutely zero safety net. Yet, the ultimate lesson of this narrative lies in how I chose to break the cycle. The true measure of family responsibility is not found in blindly subsidizing the destructive habits of the adults who raised you. It is found in fiercely protecting the innocence and the future of the children you are raising. When I refused to take out a loan against my home to save my brother, I was making a profound parenting decision. I was choosing Leo stability over my mother's demands. In traditional family structures, we often confuse enabling with helping. We are conditioned to believe that saying no to family is a moral failure. But I learned that establishing an ironclad boundary is sometimes the most deeply moral action a person can take. I recognized that allowing my son to grow up in a system where his security could be sacrificed for someone else's recklessness would be passing down the very trauma I had survived. Honesty and integrity are the bedrock of any healthy family. They are the invisible mortar that holds the bricks together. Richard and Susan completely abandoned these values. They forged signatures, stole identities, and weaponized the legal system. They believed that the facade of family loyalty justified their staggering deception. But deceit is a corrosive acid. It eats away at the foundation until the entire structure collapses. I countered their deception with absolute forensic truth. I did not yell, I audited. I proved that integrity backed by verifiable boundaries will always dismantle a narrative built on lies. If you are listening to this and recognizing the echoes of your own family dynamic in these words, you are not alone. If you have ever felt like the overhead in your parents' ledger, or if you have ever had to fight to protect your own peace from the people who were supposed to provide it, this community is here for you. We explore these quiet hidden battles because naming the trauma is the first step in dismantling it. Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts, and be sure to subscribe to Aura Vengeance. We will continue to bring you the stories of those who refuse to let their history dictate their future. As we look at the choices I made, we are left to consider the invisible ledgers we maintain in our own lives. We all inherit a history, a complex accounting of debts and credits, of resentments and expectations passed down through the bloodline. We are handed the math of our ancestors. But what we often forget, until a moment of crisis forces our hand, is that we are not obligated to keep using their formulas. There comes a time when you must look at the balance sheet of your relationships and ask yourself what it is truly costing you to keep the accounts open. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer the next generation is to declare bankruptcy on the generational trauma you were handed. You walk away from the crumbling estate, you step out into the cold, clean air, and you begin to build something entirely new. You close the door on the people who refuse to see your worth, and you wonder as the silence settles around you if they ever truly understood what they lost, or if they are simply sitting in the dark, still waiting for a debt that will never be paid.